Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Marketing and Communications Center webcast. I'm Chiqui Cartagena, the CMO of the Conference Board, and today I'm delighted to share with you some very futuristic insights for what's next. As the holiday season gets underway, so does the season of predictions for what next year will bring. And today, we have a real treat for you, as our senior fellows of the Marketing and Communications Center will share with you their predictions for what will be hot and what will not in 2020 in the digital and social media space. But first, a quick reminder that this webcast offers CPE credit. You can request credit by following the instructions you see here on screen and by clicking the three boxes during the program. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so let me just quickly introduce the senior fellows who will share with you their insights today. We'll get things started with our distinguished principal fellow, Jen McClure, who also happens to be the CEO of GEM, which provides valuable insights, information, and expertise to accelerate businesses in the digital age through consulting and advisory services, research, and publications. We will then hear from other senior fellows of the Conference Board. They are Paul Gillen, Tim Powell, Nora Gannon-Barnes, and Katie Payne, all of who are brilliant and have a lot of interesting things to say about what lies ahead. So let me begin by framing the conversation with these three questions. What are the biggest and most important trends to watch out in digital and social media? What are the implications for communications and marketing businesses and business in general? And finally, what are the biggest challenges that we are facing or will face with regard to the evolution of digital and social technologies? Please, audience, feel free to send in comments and questions for our wonderful panelists here as we go along. And Jen, let's get started with you.
Thanks, Chiqui. So, I want to start by saying that our fellows have been doing this for almost 15 years. And I recently came across our predictions from 2014, and I think we were still very optimistic about social media. We were tracking adoption by both businesses, by media, and of course by consumers and the general public across the world. What I think we see now that I don't know that we could have predicted many years ago is that social media is unfortunately not always that social. And this has come as the result of the monetization and the business models that support the primary social networks that we see, as we've seen them transform into advertising and marketing vehicles as opposed to true social networks. We have seen that we've gone from organic to paid. It is very difficult to gain traction as a business without using paid media. We, as Nora will talk about in a minute, are seeing businesses increasingly using other blogs, for example, for one-way communication. We've obviously all seen a lack of trust in the information that we can find on social media, and it's become a place for echo chambers and division, both, as we as humans are using the platforms, but also we've seen the weaponization for political purposes and many accounts that are not actually humans, that are bots. So where we have seen that lead is with younger audiences, with Gen Z and the even younger generations, starting to become a little bit more sophisticated about how they customize their use of social platforms. We see private Instagram groups, private Snap conversations, and businesses starting to use platforms to build their own private owned networks. As opposed to a few years ago, you may recall that we saw a lot of businesses using Quora, for example, or professionals using Quora or LinkedIn, which I think is still used, to ask questions and to look to those platforms for insights from their peers. we are now starting to see more private networks being built by businesses where peers can engage each other in a trusted setting.
Is that purely trust
We are also
based,
seeing,
Jen?
yes.
Is that because lack of trust?
I think it has a lot to do with trust based, and more of a sophisticated thought about privacy, which obviously is also being regulated, and we'll talk about that later on today, and the impact that that is having across the board on social networks. You know, we see Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, calling for regulation because I think they have not really figured out how to address this huge challenge of privacy, and it's become a true risk, not only to the platforms themselves, but all kinds of businesses and to our society. So the more that we can be thoughtful about how we create networks where we can feel that we're having trusted interactions and relationships, I think we're going to see more and more of that happening. We're also seeing that social technologies, what those on the call who are marketers or communicators, I still think even to this day, are sometimes frustrated because social media is seen as the free alternative to if you lose your marketing budget or you lose your advertising budget, just put something on social. It's often an afterthought. That is starting to change, again, because of the move toward needing to use paid media on the social media platforms. But we're also seeing that social technologies are really turning into enterprise tools and evolving into a tool set that is embedded into every function. So we think about how sales is using social selling techniques, how customer support is using social media for social customer care, how innovation teams are using social insights, and also for collaborating on innovation ideas and ideation processes. We're seeing how internal communications increasingly does rely on internal social networks, developer networks. So social technologies are really not just the purview of marketing and communications professionals anymore. They really are being embedded across the enterprise. And we're also seeing that particularly around issues of risk, whether that's reputational risk from an angry tweet or a rogue employee, which doesn't happen as often as one might think, or deep fakes, which we'll talk about also later on in this webcast, that there is increasingly boards are paying attention to the regulatory nature of how we use digital and social media, as well as the reputational risks around our use of digital and social media as businesses. And so digital governance and digital ethics are becoming more important considerations to senior management as well as boards.
And Jen, do you think that they will self-regulate, or do you think the trend will be for a series of rules? Will it be trade-driven? Will it be the IAB making recommendations, or the ANA, or or each to his own?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. You know, media has not figured out really how to overcome the disruptive effect of social media and digital media, and social platforms haven't really acknowledged their role as media. So is it, you know, the Federal Trade Commission? Is it the Federal Communications Commission? We have seen the FTC make some rulings around how businesses can use social media, and also we've seen the FDA use in highly regulated organizations like healthcare and life sciences. There is no ubiquitous regulatory body yet. On the privacy side, obviously, we're seeing lots of regulations emerge. Initially, the GDPR, which came out of the EU, but affects all global businesses. Anyone doing business globally, or anyone who is even doing business in the United States who may be touching a citizen of the EU is affected by GDPR. And then next month, CCPA, which is the California Privacy Act, will come into effect, although we've been in the look-back period for this past year. So those have significant effects, and I know that we did a webcast just last week talking about how marketers and communicators need to think about these new privacy regulations and how that affects different initiatives that they might take and the ways that we have thought about campaigns, about email, about, all of our digital and social media campaigns are going to be affected by those regulations about the kind of data that we can collect and what we can do with it and how we need to be able to report back on that. So from a privacy perspective, I know we're going to see increasing amounts of regulation. From just a usage perspective on social media and how the networks govern themselves or whether they are to be governed, I would predict that we will see regulations on the social media platforms. The unfortunate part is that there is a question about who should be regulating them. And of course, seeing some of the hearings over the past year or so by our Congress people and the social platforms, there is not a huge level of sophistication in terms of how we think about regulating social
So you
platforms.
predict there will be regulation, you just can't predict who will regulate, right? Well,
exactly. We may start to see some things happening in the states, state by state, the same way that we have with privacy, while we try to figure all this out, because I do think that there is a sense that we need to stop some of the bleeding in what's happening with social networks and their misuse, particularly leading up to the 2020 election.
Awesome. Well, we have a few more predictions coming from some of our other esteemed fellows, so let me move on to Paul Gillen, who's the principal of Paul Gillen Communications. Paul, let's talk about deep fakes. Let's talk about online influencers, streaming services, voice assistants, lots of stuff to discuss here. Tell us your predictions.
Well, let's start with voice assistants. Jen set things up very well, I think, by talking about the privacy implications of this increasingly public life that we live and our interactions with machines, how those interactions now seem so natural and fluid, but really are divulging a lot of information about us that I think in the long run are going to create some problems that we'll have to wrestle with. Now, voice assistants, my first prediction relates to voice assistants. I believe that voice is going to rapidly become the predominant mechanism by which we interact with devices. I'm not saying just computers or phones, but voice will be embedded into all kinds of utilities that we have around our house and in our workplace, and it will become quite natural to ask questions and to interact via voice. This has some interesting implications. Certainly, this is going to remake, I think, the search engine optimization business, because voice search results are certainly not the same as you get on a screen. It will change the way that that marketers speak to their constituents, because conversational voice is not the same as an ad platform or a written platform. And it will, I think there will be some revenge effects here as we realize that having our voice captured is a two-edged sword. We've seen a case just last month in Florida where police are trying to get access to an Amazon Echo owned by a person who is a murder suspect, believing that voice recordings on that Echo device could be critical evidence in solving that case. This is not the first case of its kind. And I think we will see other examples where in the same way that our text messages have now become a digital trail that becomes evidence in court proceedings, I think we will see the same thing happen with our voice interactions. We're still not clear. Nobody knows absolutely for sure how much of what we say to these devices is being kept. But I think we're going to have to find out. There's a lot of opacity now around the products like Alexa and the Google Voice.
That goes to the creepiness factor, right? I mean, I think there are a lot of consumers still think of voice assistants as a little creepy between what you're just talking about and what has been reported in the news about it recording us even when we're not aware of it. Do you think they're fixing that?
No. I think as Jen pointed out, the social network, the technology companies and the social network companies refuse to grow up in many ways. Facebook certainly hasn't grown up. They refuse to acknowledge that they are media entities, that they have a significant influence on public opinion, their potential for misuse. This is something that they would just rather shove aside. And I think that you're going to see the same thing happen with these voice-driven technologies. But as voice becomes ubiquitous, it'll be in our cars, it'll be on our on our shelves, it'll be in our televisions. These devices will be picking up things that we say, and we really don't have full disclosure on how that is being handled by the companies that make the devices. I think we're due for a reckoning there, and it probably will be something like these through legal channels, subpoenas for Alexa voice recordings that will begin to call some of the makers of these devices to task for owning up to what they're really doing with the data that they collect. I think that's inevitable. Whether it happens next year or not, I think it's going to happen soon.
Wow. Okay, let's talk about another creepy thing, deep fakes.
Deepfakes are deeply troubling. Now, deepfakes are images and videos and audio that is manipulated to make a person, usually a person, look like they are saying something or doing something that they didn't really do. So, you put the face of a politician on the body of a boxer, for example, as we saw this last week, and this stirs up a firestorm over, in this case, an allegation that actually was a real photo. But more likely, it's a matter of how do we believe what we see? Seeing is believing doesn't really apply anymore. I just read in the news this morning that Prince Andrew is in hot water over his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, and one of the issues, one of the pieces of evidence at issue there is a photo of him with a young woman who Andrew says he never met, but who appears to be quite chummy with him in the photo. So I think that, and this is just very peripheral stuff, I think it's going to get much deeper as we move into the election season, and we see deep fakes being used to put both Democrat and Republican candidates in awkward situations to make it appear that they're saying things that they haven't said. We saw a little of this in 2016. The technology's come a long way since then. It's democratized now. Practically anybody can use it. And we're going to see it, I think, misused in the political realm in 2020. Now, of course, that will have ripple effects that will extend into areas like marketing. We've seen some good uses of deep fakes in marketing. For example, there was a company that did a video with Beckham, the soccer player, in which it had him speaking natively in 9 different languages by using the video, by altering the video to make it appear that he was a native speaker in those languages. That was a very clever use of deepfake technology, and one that had got a lot of mileage for that brand at very low cost. I think we will see cases like that where deepfakes can be used to benefit brands, to entertain, for satirical purposes. But I think more likely what we'll see in 2020 is the ugly side of deepfakes, primarily for their use in politics. Hopefully some good things come out of that, but as Jen pointed out, our greatest aspirations for the potential of social media have been frustrated by some of the ugly downsides, and I think the same factors will be at play here.
But Paul, let me ask you on the political note, can media companies vet whether something is a deep fake before, obviously you're talking about political advertising. Can it be vetted somehow? Can people receiving the advertising say, let me run it through my deep fake machine or whatever to see if in fact it has been manipulated?
Certainly the technology is there. It's called blockchain. And if images, videos, audio recordings are imprinted with or protected by blockchain, then their authenticity can be absolutely verified. However, blockchain is still in the starting gates. It's moving slowly right now. There's a lot that has to happen to make it mainstream, to make it part of the everyday experience, so that we can spot these fake items when we see them. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you see a video on Facebook and you can tell precisely, you can tell immediately if that video is true or false? The technology is there to do that, but like most advanced technologies, the problem isn't the invention. The problem is the mass distribution. It's the
Right,
mass
but that's why I'm
acceptance.
saying, can it be vetted before it actually hits mass distribution?
But mass distribution, everyone has mass distribution today. Everyone has access to mass distribution.
Okay.
So no, we can, something that becomes viral, a video that I shoot with my camera phone can go viral, can reach millions of people, and I become essentially a mass distributor. There's no way we can gate that. That genie is out of the bottle. And I think it will be up to technology companies to find ways to commercialize the technology they already have that can spot this kind of stuff and make it a seamless part of the experience of using a phone or using a desktop PC.
Paul, let's talk about streaming devices or influencers. We need to start wrapping up.
Yeah, well, streaming services, I think, I don't need more remote controls in my life, probably true of most of you. And streaming services have simply added more confusion, more complexity to the process of finding what I actually want to watch. So there are a lot of streaming services out there right now. I don't think there is enough of a market. I don't think there's enough money to go around to support all of them. It's remarkable that the streaming video market is as big as it is, and yet there's been almost no consolidation. So I think in 2020 we're going to begin to see some consolidation. We'll see some of these niche services get picked up by the Amazons, the Netflix of the world, the Disney TVs of the world, and those companies will get bigger, and they'll begin to winnow out the smaller companies in the field. I simply don't believe there's enough money to go around to support 25 different streaming platforms.
Okay.
Finally, influencer marketing. There's been a issue that's been close to my heart for many years. I see influencer marketing now has really gone mainstream. I saw an estimate that's nearly a $2 billion market right now. Particularly Instagram is a hot area for influencer marketing, but there are other, nearly every social network has influencers who can act as proxy marketers. I think that the amount of money that is being paid to influencers is getting to the point now that influencers are actually going to start organizing, are going to start demanding some contractual consistency. Right. So that they know what they're getting, what they're being paid for, and what they are to deliver.
They're unionizing.
And I think that's unionizing. And I don't think we'll see a union, but I think we will see pressure. I would also like to see more pressure on influencers to disclose their relationships with
clients.
These brands, because those rules have really fallen by the wayside, and it is kind of a Wild West out there right now.
Well, thanks, Paul. Joining me in the studio is my good friend Tim Powell, president of the Knowledge Agency. You also have some insights about AI and accountability, regulation. Tell us, what do you think?
Some of what, well, first of all, whatever I say is not going to really be a prediction. I wouldn't venture to predict in this area. It's moving too quickly. There are too many unknowns like government. But I see this in terms of trends and things, big things to watch.
Sure.
So I've found basically 10 things that I'm watching that I think are important, and I tried to chunk those down. They have three big areas. One is governance, one is privacy and data ownership, and one is technology. Some of these things have been mentioned before, but I'll give you my particular readout on these. I think the biggest single thing is the continual calls that I can predict will continue for greater accountability for the social media industry, starting with the GDPR, then moving to California, then possibly other states in the U.S. will begin to regulate these companies in some ways. The company side of this, and this is one of the studies I actually have done for the Conference Board, is to look at the escalation of these issues, whereas these issues started really with operational issues and IT and that kind of thing, very data level issues. They've now escalated, and boards and C-suites are becoming aware that this is real money being spent and real reputational risks at risk with potentially with social and digital media. So it's becoming more of a company policy and even public policy issue. I think that will continue. I would even predict at some point, I won't say it's going to be this coming year, that there will be some international agreements, because as we all know, media doesn't social media or any media. It really doesn't stop with borders. So national borders may seem more and more antiquated, and we may get international treaties and agreements covering digital media.
But so who do you think really should regulate? Should it be the IAB? Should it be
Well,
international organizations? I mean, who's the right person to monitor?
I was going to say this for my lightning round. It's a very complicated issue. I saw Lee Bollinger, as a First Amendment spokesman, president of Columbia, speak about this. It's very complex. It has to do with the history of how the press was regulated and the electronic media. They were regulated differently, and I won't presume to give you an exposition on that. It's very complicated. But there are a lot of people working on it. It's basically, as I understand it, and this is one of my points here, and people are looking at the way that Facebook manages to position themselves is not as a publisher, because publishers are regulated differently, but as a platform for the free expression of ideas. And so they have positioned, they and other social media with them as the sort of the thought leader, as First Amendment facilitators, and which is a nice place to be. We all, at least in America, have a First Amendment, and we all agree that that's the First Amendment, very important. But as a matter of the law of the Telecommunications Act of '96, as I understand it, they managed to get legal recognition of their, to absolve them of responsibility for the content.
But now we know that's not true anymore. I mean, they got to face the music.
But they're constantly playing backpedal. I don't think that they have the technical capabilities really. Certainly the costs of their policing all the content, as a publisher would need to do, would throw their numbers completely out of whack. It would completely change the economics of the industry. So they're going to resist it because their whole business model depends on not having to really account carefully for how they use your data.
So they lose a couple zeros at the end.
Well,
there'll still be gazillionaires.
It's a good question, though, and I believe that they're at a point. I was going to say this for the lightning round, so I'll probably rehash it right then. Is they're right at the point right now, and I think 2020. I am comfortable with making this as the year pending the election. There's a lot of stuff we're going to say pending the election, maybe 2021.
Right.
But when they either become regulated or they regulate themselves, I think that's the best option for them, is to get ahead of this stuff, to manage it themselves. I went through a case study with another industry I lived through, which is the tobacco industry, where they decided basically to regulate themselves and use the FDA. They're at the point right now where they absolutely need to do that. They need to show some accountability, and they need to step up and regulate themselves before someone else does.
Right.
To continue on that theme, there's at least one candidate, there may be more than one, but Liz Warren has advocated antitrust actions against the largest players. They own multiple platforms like Facebook and Instagram. She's particularly talked about breaking up Facebook with its various pieces, WhatsApp and so forth.
Right.
Then, as we've all mentioned before, fake news is an issue. We've all seen it in politics. It's going to be an issue in the private sector. And government is already stepping in places. They just passed a law in Singapore, for example, that allows the government to take over, to demand that fake news be withdrawn from a site, or that a clear notice be given that the government has declared this as fake news. Singapore just is putting in the law. China has a law like that, and these laws tend to spread. And these laws are very close to what you would say is censorship.
Right.
It gets very close to what the government can say. So that's a global trend.
Yeah, how do you define the
Yeah.
fake news? I mean, when you say Singapore and Hong Kong, I mean, look at they're not necessarily democratic.
Let's never
countries.
forget, in the U.S. we are spoiled because we have a First Amendment. Not everyone has a First Amendment. I just read the other day, Australia, for example, doesn't have it. We just take it for granted, but not everybody has it. As far as privacy and data ownership, I think we've all talked about a little bit about greater transparency, greater user control over data. Things like the right to be forgotten is a very interesting issue that's going, I believe, through the European courts. But there's a constant battle between individuals and even law enforcement agencies with this issue of emergency access. Facebook is fighting to keep end-to-end encryption when people like the CIA, the FBI want emergency access to certain accounts. So there's a back and forth, and we mentioned, Paul mentioned the issue of devices and those picking up, and governments being able to subpoena that stuff, which in many cases they can. The Gen program that Jen put on a couple weeks ago showed amazing uses of data that no citizen even realizes. New York Times just had a section on this that's shocking. I mean, people even that study it, like myself.
Well, and at the heart of that question, I think, is who owns my data?
I'm glad you mentioned that.
I own my data.
I'm glad you
I think
mentioned
it's a
that.
human right.
Well, that's great, because the ultimate extension, and there is a movement right now, that was the last point I was going to mention, not even on the slide, is data ownership. How far do we carry it? Certain advertisers will say, oh, we believe, and I heard one the other day at Jen's conference say, oh, we believe in data ownership. I wanted to say to her, how far do you carry that? If it's my data, are you willing to license it from me? Are you willing to pay me for it? This has been an issue in the market research. I spent a lot of time in the market research business. There's always an issue of, shouldn't we be paying people, or how are we paying people,
Well,
or
but
compensating them?
initially people gave up all this information just to get to the app, right? I want to get on Facebook, I want to get on, Google or whatever. But, and of course nobody read, 17 pages of disclaimers and legal ownership. That, I think, is being very much challenged these days. And I think there is a movement towards, there's data rights are human rights, right? And so it doesn't belong to Facebook. It belongs to Chiqui Cartagena or to Tim Powell.
That's true in theory, but who's going to make that happen? I think how that happens, maybe consumers are going to have a union.
No?
Yeah.
Or
possibly.
self-regulation,
Yeah,
right?
it's a very cool issue, very interesting.
Yeah.
I just finished a book on the value of knowledge, and that's a footnote in this, is how do you value this stuff? In Europe, there's a study of patient healthcare data. It's worth
Right.
tens of billions of dollars.
I
It's
bet.
a huge number. That's free now to the companies, so
Hmm.
that'll play out. As far as technology trends, everybody's excited about, and I am too, disinformation. It's a lot of fun. It's not only deep fakes, which are really a lot of fun, and also horrible in some ways, but the fun ones are fun. But disinformation has a lot of other implications, and now it's coming into the private sphere. There's a guy, Josh Mitz, up at Columbia, studying what short sellers are doing with deep fakes, disinformation, I should say, not deep fakes, but just disinformation about a company can cause its stock price to go down precipitously. If you short the stock and then put out that information, which could even be true or fake, the stock price goes down, you make a lot of money. And according to Josh Mitz at Columbia, that is currently legal to do that. So he's trying to get the law changed. But there are a lot of very interesting things you can do if you have the criminal mind at work with disinformation. To answer your earlier question about deep fakes and how they can be detected, there's a lot of talk with Zuckerberg and people like that about AI and how AI can help with deep fakes and that kind of thing. But I think my personal opinion is that AI has been overrated in a lot of cases. The case example I use is the New Zealand massacre, where somebody streamed on Facebook and then just shot, 50 people, and AI was not able to stop that. So AI, and we could debate this all day, but I don't think that self-driving cars, for example, are realistic. I don't think they're going to happen. Not for the reasons of the technology per se, but all the other factors, like how much does it cost to insure somebody that might go around and hit other people, that kind of thing. That's another discussion for another time.
Yes,
but
it is.
AI, I think, is catching up. And one more thing I'll mention, if I could, is
likes-driven culture.
Likes-driven culture.
Let's
We
talk
just saw
about
this
that.
past week 2 K-pop stars who were aging out of the K-pop business.
Yep.
One was 29, I believe, and they became bullied on social media. And the issue of bullying is not just in Korean pop stars, but social media culture. There's a feeling, and Jen mentioned this earlier on, that the euphoria and utopia is turning into a dystopia or an examination of the darker side. Cyberbullying is a good example. People actually die because of cyberbullying. So
Yeah.
what do we do about that?
So you think that'll change in 2020? Or
I
you
think
it'll be looked at
re-examined.
more?
I think it's being looked at more. Again, it's a question of who's going to do this. There's so many companies, or these few companies, making so much money. It's a question of whether they're going to see it themselves and take that on, or whether it's going to have to come from outside. I think it's going to have to come from some, either not government, but some third-party agencies looking at this kind of thing, which they are doing. People are monitoring this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to remind everybody out there that you can send questions. I'm not sure I'm seeing them here come in, but if you have any questions for any of these wonderful speakers, please send them through and I'll make sure I can ask them. So now let's turn to the world of academia and bring in Nora Gannon Barnes. who is the director of the Center for Marketing Research at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. Nora, what does your crystal ball tell you about 2020?
Well, for me, the crystal ball is research studies that we do. Since I met Jen quite a long time ago, I focused on studying social media use as best I could so that we had some really good data, because that's what's been missing in the social media space for a long time. There's a lot of speculating and not a lot of hard data. So I've tried to focus on that. The predictions or trends that I see look like two disparate things, but in fact, they both speak to what Jen started off with, and that's this idea that social media may be becoming less social. The idea of engagement may be something we re-examine or redefine. So I'm going to start with chatbots. We did a study on chatbots, and as everybody knows, bots have proliferated. As a matter of fact, the current statistic is that in 2020, 85% of consumer interaction will be conducted through some kind of bot.
80%?
So this is something, 85%. 2020, we're looking at 85%. Right now, our latest research shows that 67% of consumers have already interacted with bots, and that's that they actually know about it. Lots of times we don't even know about it.
But is that because they force you
of,
to? Because, I mean, I don't like the chat boxes, but sometimes you have no option but to interact with the little chat thing. I'm like looking for the phone number.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, absolutely correct. A lot of times there is no choice. And it, not only is that online, but telephone as well. So we are being forced to deal with bots of all kinds, some far more sophisticated than others. And in some cases, consumers are even unaware that they're interacting with these kind of virtual digital assistants. So it's everywhere. We did find out that 67% of people do know that they've interacted with bots to get information. And about 40% of them were satisfied with the interaction that they got. And the reason that they were, because their problem was solved. I mean, basically what consumers want is 24-hour service, and they want the answer to their question. So if they can get that done, they're not unhappy. So on the consumer side, I'm not sure that they see the kinds of things that we might worry about in this panel. So for example, one of the things that bots do very well is collect vast amount of data. So bots collect data on all kinds of things that human beings interacting on a customer service call might not. And that data is put into large vats of data analytics to do lots of things later. So there's that, and that's a concern. And again, data collection, whose data is it, what information is yours on a call, so that's all stuff we need to concern ourselves with, I think. We also heard from consumers that they don't want to talk to a bot in the healthcare area, in the financial services area, in government services, in areas where there's very personal conversation going on and questions that hold risk. They really want human interaction. So here's the problem. We found that consumer service costs dropped 30% for businesses that employ technology, bots of some kind. And a 30% reduction in costs is huge. And when we have businesses telling us that ROI is their number one concern, I think this speaks for itself. I don't think there's going to be less bots. I don't think there's going to be less technology. Businesses are saving a ton of money by using this technology. So now the question is, what are the implications for marketing?
But let me ask you this, and this is to anybody who wants to contribute, can AI help the bots? I mean, can the bots get smarter?
The bots are smart. The bots are smart. We have bots that are some very simple ones, and we have bots that are terribly sophisticated. And so, yes, they can help, but the problem is that they're always going to be able to go just so far. And when you get to someone making a call about a medication or about an interaction or about even a semi-emergency, that those are going to be difficult no matter how sophisticated the bots are. And I have to also interject that some of these bots are being used for entertainment and fun, and actually are doing a better job with this idea of engagement even through technology. And I'll just tell you very quickly, Casper mattresses, if you go to the Casper site, they have an insomniac bot. And so if you can't sleep at night, and it's only open from midnight to 5 in the morning, and you can go and you can interact with the bot, and the bot will tell jokes. The bot will suggest ordering a pizza. The bot will actually play games with you. There's a set of games that the bot can play, and you can chit chat with the bot, if you'd like to. So, I worry about engagement, but then I see something like that, and I think maybe they get it. Maybe they get it. So in the end, I think the challenge is how to make this work for everybody. So yes, we want to save money on customer service, but yet we have consumers that very much need to talk to a person in certain industries at certain times. And I think that has to be addressed. And I think that's going to be the challenge. So, I'm not pro or anti chatbots. I just think we need to give some thought to a good consumer engagement. And that's what scares me the most, is that we become less social and less engaged. And so chatbots are here to stay. They're only going to get more common and proliferate even more than they have already. So I think that that's just a reality. I think the challenge is now how to do it right, how to do it well, so that there is still a human connection at some point in the system.
Totally agree. Corporate blogs, tell me more about that. What do you think about that?
Well, Jen was the inspiration for this a very long time ago. We did the first study about 15 years ago on how the largest companies in the world were using social media, what social media tools they were using, what they liked, what they didn't like. And so now we have all these years of trend data, and we can see, for example, that the use of blogs has gone from 23% to 54% since we started tracking them. So there are more blogs. Now, the other side of that is the use of blogs has changed. They were at the beginning a very personal kind of engagement between a corporation and their customers, talking about some of their innovations, some of the things they were thinking about, advice on how to use products. And now we see that they've become newsrooms, they've become platforms for advertising new products. So they're still called blogs, but with a very different look and a very different tone. And what bothers me more than that is that we've always looked at whether or not a corporation accepted comments on their blogs as a metric for engagement, whether or not they spoke at any point that we could see directly to their consumers. And that's really the disheartening part, and that's why I put this in here. And we have just seen this go from, I want to make sure the numbers are exactly right, in the past 5 years, a drop from 73% of blogs that were accepting comments to 18% in 5 years. 73% to 18%. That's massive. And so when we see that kind of trend among the largest corporations in the world, these are the Walmarts, these are the Apples, these are the IBMs, these are the largest companies in the world, and they've stopped communicating on their blogs. So their blogs are transitioning to more of a media outlet, and now we're dropping in terms of consumer engagement.
But do you think that's because of the governance issue, the risk that somebody's going to say something publicly on a blog that either defames the corporation or puts in question some of their practices? They're trying to avoid the negative feedback, basically.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think that's a major component. And here's the other side of it. We ask these businesses if they have a crisis management plan, if in fact one of these kinds of things happen, if they're ready for it. And I have to tell you, it's less than a third have responded that they have any kind of a plan for a negative attack, whether it be through negative comments or something else that goes viral. So
well, they need to join
this
our council
seems to,
on, internal and external communications. They get a thing or two out of
I
that.
think so. I think so. So my two disparate trends are documented through our research. We know that there are more chatbots. We know that there's less engagement between large companies and consumers. So both of those together make me look out and wonder about the social and social media and whether or not engagement is now redefined in some way or a priority anymore. We talked for a long time in marketing about relationship marketing, one-on-one marketing, personalized marketing. Now we seem to be moving away from those things into something that's more technological, more ROI friendly, and more protective in terms of how businesses are acting.
That's crazy. I think given the increased focus on customers and social corporate responsibility, I think these two trends are sort of coming to head. And given the fact that really the internet has been around, what, 25 years? Is that about 25, maybe?
94.
Yeah, since 94. That we're moving back, and some of the things that created, right? We're going to private, less interaction, private spaces. But the bottom line really, I think, is about metrics. So let us go to our final senior fellow here and turn the microphone over to Kate Payne, who's also known as the Measurement Queen. She's been a pioneer in the field of measurement for 3 decades. And Katie, you've heard a lot of predictions so far. What do you have to tell us about everything you've heard today? AI, data privacy, value of communications. Talk to us.
Well, thank you. And there's a couple of things that, one thing about Nora's thing about the comments on blogs, a lot of it is the fact that when I measure people's blogs, there are no comments. Right? People are not interacting. And I think that goes back to something you just mentioned, which is people are just like overly socialized, right? I mean, we talk to people, at least that I know of, are talking to fewer people on Facebook. They're engaging with fewer people on Twitter. They're just narrowing down, I think, a little bit because the social sphere seems so enormous. So I think, and we've sort of touched on this before, but I think what you're going to see is, yes, AI and data analysis are going to be a much bigger part of measurement. I mean, frankly, the measurement part of communications has lagged a lot in some ways because of an unfamiliarity with technology, in some ways because people frankly don't go into communications because they love math and data science, but they don't have a choice anymore because the people that write checks and the people that decide your future out there, they're swamped with data, and they're using data and they're using AI to make decisions. And if communications doesn't do that, they're going to be lagging behind. So we had this interesting summit in October, and one of the things that everybody said was that AI was going to be playing a bigger role. And the question is really where? And where we see it is, for example, if you have enough data, you can figure out exactly what the time frame is between the time that you do something in communications or in marketing and the time that you get a response, right? That's, it's time lag. Correlations are sort of how people are making decisions. It was part of marketing mix modeling. That's happening now to PR, to social media. Additionally, you can sit there, and I'm in the middle of a test right now to see if this is going to be true, but the idea is that you can look at back crises, right? The prior crises that you've experienced and figure out what the right responses are. And that's all AI driven, right? It's basically using AI to say, okay, here was all of the response to this crisis. Here's what you did. What's the best response? So things like that, where it's just going to be part of how we make decisions, whether we like it or not. It's going to tell us, what the best ways of doing things are.
And it takes the emotion out of the thought process, right?
Yes.
Because I think
that's all.
that's often paralyzing.
Yeah, and basically that's the reason what I've said all along is the fact that it's a lot easier if you have data in front of you to win an argument because you take a lot of emotions out of it. It's no longer just the highest paid person in the room. It's basically here's the data, and I've helped clients win arguments like this for 30 years now, and it's amazing. I mean, you just sort of sit there and you say, okay, the answer is that your blog's not getting any comments, so don't use it as a way of getting feedback anymore. Your Twitter is getting no comments either. You think you're just pushing this stuff out there to get people to engage with it, but if people aren't engaging with it, why are you doing it? So I think there's an awful lot of emphasis right now in terms of making decision making using both data analytics and AI. And trying to decide what works and what doesn't work. What we've gone from is kind of saying, you know, all this social stuff and all this PR stuff is essentially free. Now everybody realizes that the most expensive thing you've got is talent, and how people spend their time is really what you're making decisions about. So when people have implemented these peso models with all kinds of different moving parts. And I'm doing dashboards for people with 13 different communications departments. They're trying to figure out what the best use of people's time is. You can't just do that with, analyzing your, decision report or your Sprout social report. You have to look at it all in one big thing. And the only way you really can efficiently do that is with AI. Now, it's not going to happen next week, or frankly, maybe not even next year, but it's certainly going to be a bigger part of the conversation on a whole bunch of different levels. And I think it's not just AI; it's the increasing reliance on data. What I'm seeing is a lot of communications departments bringing in data analysts from the perspective of trying to find out some of these answers, because they've given up on trying to teach communications people math and data science, and they're basically saying, hey, let's grab some data scientists from somewhere else in the organization or from outside, bring them in, tell them a little bit about PR and social media and communications, and let them do their magic.
But is measurement purely based on comments or likes and stuff like that? I mean, isn't that part of the problem, trying to measure communications? How? That's the question.
Well, I mean, measurement is always going to reflect whatever the goal is, right? So right now I'm in the middle of working for a client whose goal is credibility, right? They want to be the most trusted, credible source for X. Now, the right way to measure that is to ask people who's the most credible source, right? When you think of X, who's your most credible source? So that's survey research. It's still data, but it's way, way, way from likes and interactions. The issue there is that if you do not have survey data, you have to come up with proxies for credibility, or proxies for trust, or proxies for preference or consideration. And that's where the data comes in, is the fact that you have to basically screen out, and this is happening in real time everywhere, is the fact that you've got to screen out all of these gazillion pieces of data that social media brings at you, and say, well, wait a minute, what's the closest thing that we can get to approximate I'm inclined to buy your product, right? And that's actually been done. There's a guy, Michael Wolff, who's actually figured out what the words are that indicate, and he's
intent to
out.
buy.
There are certain words
that's incredible.
That is, this is the intent to buy.
On that note,
yeah.
Katie, and I want to bring in the whole panel. We have a question from Rosa Alonso, who I actually know, a wonderful marketer. And she asks to all of you, as marketers, we rely on this open source world of data to target and often retarget consumers for profitability. Privacy rules will certainly raise the price of data and thus targeting consumers. Opt-in scenarios are already killing business in the EU. Do you foresee major brands, agencies, ad tech players joining this privacy bandwagon in 2020, or will they be fighting it? And if so, how will they influence the progress or lack thereof of privacy rules? So that's a great question, Rosa. Thank you. Who wants to jump in? Go ahead, Katie.
If I could just throw out there from the measurement side of things, the people who are collecting this data, they've already said this is going to affect our future, and we don't know what we're going to do, right? That we're not going to be able to collect all the data that we're so used to relying on, and that's a major change, and we haven't figured out how to solve it yet.
Tim?
Collecting data costs money. It's hard work. It involves resources,
research.
and there's no doubt, as I mentioned in my comments, it's going to change the economics of these businesses if they actually have to pay for data, which has been free up to now. It's like they've had a free resource, just like when companies were able to pollute streams free. And then somebody said, no, that's an externality, you need to cost that in. This is what an economist would call an externality, free data about consumers, because they share with each other. But if they have to pay for it, it'll completely change the economics. I agree with Katie, a lot of people will just go out of business. The economics don't work. Facebook has already had, I think, adds 15,000 people, if I'm not mistaken, human people that are expensive, patrolling for deep fakes and other kinds of offensive content. So it's real cost. It's not just AI algorithms, it's people.
Nora, sorry, cut you off.
No. I was just going to say, I'm going to go one step further. And as a researcher, I'm paying more to collect data. So, and finding it harder to collect data because of privacy rules. So I have a major hospital that wants me to find registered nurses that might be interested in going there. And because of the privacy rules, it's going to cost me so much money to collect that data. And then it's going to cost the hospital so much money to get that data from me. So it trickles down. Let me just say that privacy thing is going to trickle down, and it's going to be harder for me to collect data to sell or to give to other people.
Paul?
To address one part of the question, I think it would be impolitic for a company to come out against data privacy. In fact, we're seeing quite the opposite happen. Companies, as part of their social responsibility initiatives, are now supporting guaranteeing that they will treat your data carefully. So I don't think they will actively lobby against it. There's a silver lining to this as well. I mean, clearly the trends globally are toward more data protection of private information. We saw, in addition to GDPR, we have a very similar law in Australia, a similar one in Canada that's being considered. We have the California CCPA that Jen referred to at the outset, and others at the state level in the U.S., other kinds of legislation being considered. So I think there's no doubt that privacy regulations will get stricter in the future. I think there is a silver lining here, which, yes, some companies are being hurt by GDPR, but other companies, I've seen other marketers say that they've actually benefited from it. It's forced them to clean up their data act. It's forced them to rethink segmentation and profiling, and also to reconsider the value of branding rather than personalizing everything and shoving personalized messages in the email.
Jen, I'll give you the last word on this question.
Yes, thank you. I mean, Paul really was, he set up a nice segue for exactly what I wanted to say. I think we have to go beyond whether data is free or paid to the idea of data ethics and digital ethics. And Tim referenced an event we held at the conference board a couple weeks ago on this very topic. Companies really are trying to figure out how to approach business in this new world where everything is digital, increasingly the way that we transact, digital payments, the way we deal with customer service is through bots, the way that we interact with each other is through digital platforms. People have to make a choice as consumers as to whether or not they want to give up their data, and companies have to be ethical about the way that they use it. And so we are trying to figure this out, and there are companies that are using this for competitive advantage from a branding perspective. We saw Tim Cook and the Apple ads that are focusing on their commitment to data privacy. Tim Cook made another statement at Dreamforce last week about Apple's commitment to data privacy. And we actually led a study last year with one of our other senior fellows, Susan Getgood, on balancing data privacy compliance with innovation. And we asked many of the conference board members about how they are thinking about these new data privacy regulations and how they will balance that with their innovation efforts, or how they will approach using this new governance around how they use data in an innovative way. And so we do know that companies are really thinking about this deeply.
Well, thank you all for joining me today. For those out there watching the webcast, the deck, and actually a lot more of the deck, will be offered to you as a free download when you look for it. There were a few other senior fellows who could not join us today, and they also weigh in on some of the predictions that will be here with us in 2020 and clearly beyond. I want to thank you all for joining us today and joining us in studio, and of course all you webinar participants as well for tuning in. But if you still can't get enough, you might want to catch my colleague Alex Parkinson in a couple weeks when he and Nora, of course, will be discussing how social media use is being done by companies in the Fortune 500. I can't wait myself. And with that, I want to say goodbye for now and felices fiestas.